Evening. Feels like they got me up here quick on purpose. Can't imagine why. All right, so I guess technically last week kicked off our summer series, but for all intents and purposes, this is the first lesson on spiritual disciplines tonight. And while it is not a guest speaker for the summer, like we promised, all the rest will be, okay? I promise. I want to recap a little bit from last week. You remember, we've got our summer series. If you weren't here this morning, there are flyers that we got in the back. You can get a flyer. You can invite people to the summer series. It will be a really good series. And there's something about having a special thing that makes it easier to invite people to. Like, come to church with me on Sunday, the same time that everyone goes to church all the time, feels, I don't know, normal. Come to church with me, we're having this special thing, feels easier. And so use the summer series as an excuse to bring people to a special activity, a special event. We're doing guest speakers. We're teaching and learning about this same subject every week. It's a great opportunity to invite people and have them come learn more about God and about the church and hopefully be more like Jesus because of it. Last week, we talked about why spiritual disciplines. We went over for quite a while about the easy yoke problem, this problem of Jesus' promise of an easy yoke and how we don't seem to be experiencing that. Either something's wrong with the promise or something's wrong with us, and we know the answer already before we got too far into it. But what is the problem? The problem, as we looked at last week, is that we have shrunk down. We have some false categories, and it's caused us to shrink down what it means to be like Jesus. We separate our life into this physical and spiritual, these two categories, and we think, well, Jesus, he was focused on the spiritual, not the physical. And so then we shrink down what it means to follow and act like Jesus to just the things we deem spiritual. Then we take the spiritual things and we break those into two more categories of the big spiritual things and the little spiritual things. And we say, well, to be like Jesus means to do the big spiritual things. And so we've shrunk down our category even smaller. And now the life of Jesus has become turning the other cheek and in these big moments of trial, acting like Jesus. But the only reason he was able to do that is because all the rest of his life, the physical parts, the small spiritual parts, were already in play. And we fail to receive the life of Jesus that he promises because we don't live the lifestyle that Jesus promised, that Jesus demonstrated for us. So that was, super fast cliff notes on last week's lesson. The idea is, if we do the little things that Jesus did, if we live the full lifestyle of Jesus, then we will receive this easy yoke, this blessing of the life Jesus lived. And so that leads us right into the summer series because the next logical question is, what did he do? What are some of the things? Joshua was funny after last week. He goes, hey, loved your lesson, whatever. I just kept waiting on you to tell me what things Jesus did. He said, but when I said that to Jana, she said, that's what the whole summer's going to be about. And then I felt like a goofball because of course it is, right? And I totally understood what he was saying. We spent a lot of time building the problem. That's kind of how I think through lessons is first we have to know what the problem is. So we've got to build out the problem. That was the majority of the lesson last week. What's the problem? Why the spiritual disciplines are the solution? Well, here we go. How do we live the life Jesus lived? What were the things that were the things in Jesus' life that led him to have this easy yoke that he had? How did Jesus carry the burdens of this life? All right. Our world is obsessed with progress and efficiency. Have you noticed this? Not that long ago, there was a video of a guy who went through his morning routine, and it kind of went viral. He got up in the morning, and he's in incredible shape, and lives in some bougie house, and and has all this stuff, and he goes through his morning routine. Some of y'all probably saw it. And he starts at 3 a.m. and he washes his face, or he takes a shower, and then he does his face mask, and then he does his yoga, and then he works out, and then the whole time it's cutting, and by 7 a.m. he's lived a full life, And the point is, nobody does that every day. It was this crazy video. But the idea behind the video, and a strong idea behind our culture, is you got to get this stuff in early in the morning so you can hit the ground running, so you can be successful, so you can hustle and generally make money and be successful. That's usually the story that's pushed out in our culture. The nickname is often given to it is hustle culture. I remember another video I saw where a guy said he went through his morning routine, and he said, everything I need to do, I have done before 9 a.m. so that I can focus the rest of my day on making money. And I was like, everything? And he was like, in the video, he said, I spend 20 minutes of quality time with my wife aligning our auras, and I hold each of my children for 4 minutes in the morning. And it was just bizarre. But it speaks to this broader thing we do in our culture where everything is about efficiency and progress and productivity, and hustle is kind of the umbrella term for all of this. You got to hustle to get what you want. You got to put in the hours. And if you're not working now, someone else is. And they're going to catch you before you get what you want. And this whole idea has produced a lot of tired people. A lot of them. It's exhausting. In fact, we think, and the message that's pumped out by this hustle culture is that if you're going to have an impact in the world, and for some reason in our world this always equates to making money, but if you're going to have an impact in the world, you've got to be going 24/7, nonstop, grinding to get that edge. But then we take a second and we look at Jesus. And we ask the question, how much did he hustle? Well, if he didn't hustle, certainly he didn't change the world, right? Well, actually, he was, by almost every metric, the most influential human to ever walk on the earth. You might think that's hyperbole, but I mean no exaggeration. Everything that we have in our world comes from Jesus, not in the way that we talk about everything is from God. Everything in our music, in our science, in our art, in our culture seems to have its roots in the person of Jesus. He caused this shockwave that rippled through time and is still impacting the world today. Did he hustle? He didn't seem to. In fact, there are repeating times. The one that comes to my mind immediately is when Jairus' daughter is sick and in bed, and he's on his way to heal the daughter, and in the middle of it, this woman stops him and grabs his garment, and he just stops and says, hey, who touched me? And he just lets, this is an urgent thing, right? This is an urgent thing. There's a dying daughter on the line, and Jesus is interrupted. There are things we don't let people interrupt us for. Sometimes you get a phone call, and you will not be interrupted because the person on the other side of that line or the information being given to you is so important. Dying daughter phone calls qualify, right? And Jesus stops, and he takes his time, and he engages with this woman. And in hindsight, because he's the Son of God and we've read the end of the story, we go, well, of course, he just knew he was going to raise her from the dead. Jairus didn't know that. Nobody else at the house knew it. And yet there's this unhurried pace that Jesus demonstrated over and over and over again. We, on the other hand, have listened to the culture far more than we do Jesus. And it's just a difficulty and a battle that we have in our world. We're sick. We've got this, I would say the main disease that we have today is distraction. We've got a disease of distraction where every waking moment we've got something vying for our attention. Kids these days. I just turned 30, so I think I can officially say that. Also, I have kids, so kids these days don't know what it means to be bored. Do you guys remember boredom? Most of us don't remember boredom very well either. It's been a while since we haven't had Sudoku or Instagram on our phones and tablets. Like boredom. Do you remember that feeling where there's actually nothing to do? I mean, actually nothing. Not like I have 100 things and I'm a little too frazzled to do any of them and I'm going to sit here and relax for a minute and be a little bit bored on purpose. I mean, everything is done. Nothing is happening. What do I do? We used to just send kids outside and they'd like explore an adventure, but nowadays we don't really experience that. Planes used to be boring. You used to have to go on a flight and it would be boring, right? Now you have audiobooks and podcasts and movies, and most flights have TVs on the little screen, like on the chair in front of you. And I mean, you don't really have that problem anymore. There's constant noise. There was a time when people used to go in cars, and actually I think I just heard Sabrina talk about this on Wednesday, that you used to drive the drag, that the point of driving was simply to drive, that you would just drive. Well, that's not really how we drive anymore, first of all. We white knuckle and yell at people. But on the other hand, as soon as we get in the car, we turn something on. I mean, I often look forward to drives because I know that I'll be able to listen to a book or a podcast or some music. We have noise in our life constantly. And on top of the noise, a lot of that noise is actively vying for our attention. There was a guy recently, I can't remember his name, but he was advocating for software developers to take a Hippocratic oath, or take the Hippocratic oath. The idea is that software developers will not develop technology intended to harm. The same way a doctor vows to do no harm, that he said technology developers need to take this same oath. Because the way it works right now is everyone who makes anything for these things makes them in a way that they will eat up and take up as much of your brain and as much of your time and attention as physically possible. They designed these things and these apps after slot machines. They're designed to be highly addicting, to keep your attention, and to keep noise or advertisement going into you. And it's exhausting. And it's loud. And truthfully, these messages that we're getting from all of our devices are screaming the same thing that this hustle culture screams. Do more. Engage more. Speed up your life. It stands in direct opposition to the life that Jesus actually lived. Good catch. When Jesus lived on this earth, like, he didn't have a smartphone, which is an advantage, sure. But it's not like he didn't have people trying to get his attention. It's not like he didn't have things to do and accomplish. I mean, he was out to change the world, for crying out loud. But Jesus walked through this earth. He carried the weight of life very, very differently. We're sick with distraction, and the solution is to act and live like Jesus. Not in the big moments, but in our every single day. We're going to talk about one of the ways that he did this. Look at Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5. Luke 5 and verse 16. Well, let's look at verse 15. It says, "But now, even more, the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities." I mean, at this point, Jesus' name is spreading, and now people aren't trying to get in touch with him through email and through annoying amounts of texts, but people are literally flocking to him. The crowd is gathering around him. People are in person, novel concept, in person vying for Jesus' attention. And in verse 16 it says, "But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray." Jesus had a practice. And the implication here is this was not a one time, a couple of times. This was a regular occurrence in Jesus' life, that he would withdraw to desolate places. The ESV uses the word desolate. The Greek word there is eremos, and it has this connotation of quiet places, right? He would withdraw to desolate places, empty places. The point is, Jesus would find a time to go off by himself in a quiet and alone place, to find silence and solitude. He did not do that just once, but he did it all the time. All the time. He would find silence and solitude. Now, part of me thinks if Jesus just took part in hustle culture, maybe he could have healed more people. What do you think? I mean, if he would just been a little more selfless and quit taking all that time for himself, he could have probably done more teaching. Maybe Mark would have a couple extra chapters. Maybe Matthew would have wrote down another few sermons. I mean, what's going on here? Why does he seem to be taking all of this time to himself? It seems inefficient. It seems problematic almost. There's a kids' TV show called Recess, which I haven't watched in a while and will now definitely show my kids at some point because I remembered it. But the show was just about these. It was like a group of 5 kids that were buddies at school, and they would have, shenanigans at recess. It's an exciting premise. It's the whole name of the show. There was one particular episode, and I don't know why I've remembered this for so long, because it really was not a terribly impactful show. But there was one particular episode of this show where the teachers had this same thought process. And the teachers decided, if we just took those 30 minutes of recess out of the day and we use that time to teach the kids more, then they would learn more and their grades would be better and they'd be smarter kids. And so they do it. They cut recess. Is the episode of Recess where there was no recess. And they decided to put the kids in school for longer. And what happened is the kids hated it, obviously, because who doesn't hate recess being canceled? And their grades went up for a little while. And then their grades started going down. And the teachers were panicking, and they couldn't understand what was happening. And then one of the adults had this brilliant, revolutionary idea. What if we let the kids go outside for like 30 minutes a day and get all their ruckus out, right? We could call it Recus. Apparently, the implication was that the adults got dumber too because they didn't have recess. And so he reinvents recess. Because after you let the kids get their energy out, then they have more focus on the school. That was the whole point of the show. It was not meant to be deep. It was just funny, all right? However, it makes a great point. There's something about the way Jesus carried this life, the yoke that Jesus had, that allowed him to be far more impactful with doing less rather than doing more. Jesus' impact was not in spite of his silence and his solitude, but it was because of his silence and his solitude. Jesus regularly went to these desolate or quiet places to pray. And so here's what I want to do. I want to look at a couple of these and maybe make some comments about when or why Jesus was doing this. We're going to start here in Luke chapter 6. I think this is a really good spot. Really good spot to look. Luke chapter 5, you notice he does this all the time. And it's a fun exercise to go through each gospel and note how many times exactly Jesus withdraws or goes away to a quiet place. I saw one count that was very high. I saw other counts that were like, well, if you take away the overlaps, somewhere between 15 and 20 times potentially that it mentions Jesus going away, withdrawing or isolating himself for a time. But Luke chapter 6 and verse 12, Jesus is about to appoint the apostles. Let's actually do verse 13. Verse 13, it says, When day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12 whom he named apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, and James, the son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot, and Judas, the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. So Jesus has this, he's doing this thing. Apparently, and I think this is significant, more than just these 12 guys were following Jesus, right? Because he gathers his disciples, and then he names the apostles. So I was talking to Courtney about this a little bit. In The Chosen, they show other people following Jesus. There are even some women who follow him in The Chosen. And, I mean, they weren't apostles, but they seem to be disciples. It seems as though there were more people following Jesus than just these 12. And Jesus specifically appoints these 12 as apostles. Now, that's kind of a big deal. Look at what Jesus did the night before he made this decision. In verse 12, it says, "In these days he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12, whom he named apostles." Jesus was getting ready to appoint people to do something big. Like this is a big decision. The people that he was going to choose to carry his name as apostles were really important people. They were going to have a really important job. In fact, the apostles and writings connected to the apostles is a large reason why we have the Bible in the form that we have it. Because if one of the books, one of the writings was connected to an apostle, that gave it a certain amount of authority. Imagine had Jesus haphazardly made this decision. Right? Imagine if Jesus just went out and said, "Nah, you 12 look fine." It could have ended much differently. And certainly, Jesus would never have done that because he practiced silence and solitude. The night before, he withdrew to a quiet place and stayed up all night praying about this decision coming up in the morning. I think silence and solitude, a regular practice of silence and solitude, is something to employ when we have a big decision coming up. Now, here's what I don't mean. I don't mean ruminating and dread, which may or may not be how I feel when I have to teach and preach Bible class. I don't mean focusing on how worried and stressed out you are about something coming up in the hours leading up to it. I don't mean just dreading things because you know it's going to be difficult and terrible. I mean intentional, maybe even timed moments of silence where there's nothing in your ears, and solitude where there's no one around, where you sit with God, you can talk to him about the decision coming up, and you can listen quietly. I don't mean listen for a voice. I mean listen to the silence. This seems to be what Jesus did. He doesn't seem to be waiting on a sign or a miracle or a voice, or he just seems to know that silence and solitude will guide him into making this decision in the best way. Let's look at another one. Matthew chapter 4. This one might be a bit familiar. Matthew 4. Oh, goodness. Jesus just was baptized by John, and the Holy Spirit came down, and the voice told everyone, "This is my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased." And then chapter 4 and verse 1, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread.'" This is an interesting story. And as always, I don't think one read is the only read on a story. I think these things are written to engage with, and I think that they're written in a way that can speak to many different people in many different places. Hear me out. Typically, the way I've read this story, because I'm a regularly fed American, is, man, of course the devil came after Jesus after 40 days of fasting and isolation. The devil always hits you when you're at your lowest. Because if I go more than 12 hours without eating, you will find out very quickly I am at my lowest. And I might bite you. You never know, because we're usually fed. And when we're hungry, we feel hunger very quickly. There's another way of looking at this, though, that I think is beneficial as well. If Jesus was by himself and he was in the quiet place and he was with God for 40 days, did the devil really get him at his weakest? Or did the devil get a version of Jesus that was locked in on what was coming next? See, there's a way to read this, and I think a right read on this story, that the devil didn't come at Jesus at his lowest, but Jesus prepared for nearly a month and a half for the test that was coming. Silence and solitude, time with God, seems to be the thing Jesus used to prepare for this temptation. The thing that Jesus seemed to use to get close to God for the time of testing was the quiet place. And so when the devil comes, Jesus is not the weakest he's ever been, but rather the most focused that he's ever been. And as we know, the rest of the story handles the temptations beautifully at the very beginning of his ministry. Let's look at Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. There's a whole story here that I think is definitely worth noting. We talked about how Jesus is interruptible and how he doesn't seem to be concerned with hustling. Look at verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. This was from the limited commission that was back just a little ways in chapter 6. And when the disciples returned, they report to Jesus. And Jesus said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So it seems as though the disciples have just been sent out by Jesus. They did things in that limited commission, and as they came back, they're reporting, this is what happened. And Jesus' immediate response to them is, okay, you did some of the stuff that I did, now do the rest of the things that I did. Go find a quiet place and rest. Now notice, he doesn't say go find a quiet place and pray this time. When we find Jesus in the quiet place, he is often praying, but not always praying. In this case, the emphasis seems to be rest. Find a quiet place and rest. And then his disciples, it says, had so many people coming and going that they didn't even have the ability to eat. They were so busy. Every moment of their day was so consumed with work, with the mission, with the commission that Jesus sent them on, that they didn't even have time to eat. And Jesus says, go, make some time. Don't find the time. Don't try to work it in. Don't sneak a quick meal in. You don't need protein bars. That's not the solution here. You need silence and solitude and rest. Well, that didn't work because verse 32, when they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves, now, many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran on foot from the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." We haven't been able to eat. We got on a boat to go get some rest, and they beat us to the place that we were going, and then we've been sitting down teaching them all day long again. Let them go get something to eat. Maybe the disciples were actually saying, let us get something to eat. Like maybe there was some dual motivation going on here, right? Jesus says, you give them something to eat, in verse 37. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s, and taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces of the fish, and all those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. So Jesus shows up, and he gets to this place where he's trying to teach his disciples silence and solitude. He's trying to teach them how to rest. And he's interrupted again, and he's not upset. In fact, he's compassionate. He sits down and he teaches them all day. And it's time to eat. No one has any food. Then he does a miracle and feeds them all miraculously. And then everyone eats. And then, verse 45, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. Now, this doesn't say the quiet place, does it? This isn't a desolate place. But the implication is very clear, isn't it? If you are up on a mountain by yourself, you found a quiet place. So Jesus, after teaching, after a miracle, after trying to find a quiet place and teach his disciples, waits all day long, finally dismisses a crowd, sends his disciples away, and goes and finds his own silence and his own solitude to pray after a long day of work, maybe to rest as well. Jesus had a pattern of finding silence and finding solitude all the time. It wasn't in certain scenarios. It wasn't a Sunday morning, check it off the list, I got to do my silence and solitude. It was a lifestyle that Jesus lived of finding silence and solitude, making time to sit by himself with God. There's an important distinction to be made as well. Quiet time. I don't know if you're up on some of the self-help stuff. You're probably not unfamiliar with this idea of quiet time in the morning or finding time to have solitude and silence. The world seems to realize that the teachings and the lifestyle of Jesus are very good for you. And so they repackage them with words that feel less Christian-y, and they tell you to do those things. So this is probably not a surprise if you're familiar with some of that stuff, but it's really, really good for you to have times of silence and times of solitude. The unfortunate part is often the books will tell you to do things like empty your mind, or they will tell you to do things like look within yourself. Some of the sentiment of these practices is not terrible. But when Jesus found solitude, he was not practicing Buddhism. He was not doing some weird Eastern meditation stuff. There was a relational component to the silence and the solitude that Jesus participated in, that Jesus made time for. He was not running away to be by himself isolated. He was making time to sit with God in silence. In a world that wanted his attention constantly, Jesus made time to sit by himself in silence. And he let that time be interrupted from time to time, but he always came back to finding time. Look at Mark chapter 1. Look at Mark chapter 1. I heard, there's one of the books I read, the guy described Mark I thought it was a very funny way. He said, Jesus waited 30 years to begin his ministry. He gets baptized, and he immediately goes out into the wilderness for a month and a half by himself. Then he shows up for one day of ministry, and if you have headings, he begins his ministry and he preaches, he calls his disciples, he heals a man with an unclean spirit, he heals many in verse 29 through 34, and then we get to Mark 1 and verse 35, and rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. Jesus seems to have had one day of ministry, 40 days of solitude and silence, another full day of ministry, and a morning of solitude and silence. Then, verse 36, Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And they found him and said to him, "Everyone's looking for you." And he said to them, "Let's go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came." And he went throughout all the Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. Jesus, you did great yesterday. Do it again. We're gaining steam. People are aware of what we're doing. The revolution is going to be started. And Jesus says, nah, let's go do it again in some other town. There's a pattern that Jesus seems to display. Work and rest. With people, with God. Silence and solitude are in every single day rhythm of Jesus. And if he couldn't do it when he wanted to, then he would get up early in the morning before the sun was up. and he would make time for silence and solitude. And if he couldn't do it right when he was trying to teach his disciples, then he would send his disciples away and dismiss the crowds on his own and find a mountain, just a casual mountain, to have silence and solitude on. This is the rhythm of Jesus' life: to work and to love and to heal and to teach and to care for people and to have silence and solitude regularly. Not accidentally, not when he gets a chance, but to make time for this every single day. Now, why would we do silence and solitude, okay? First of all, we're massively distracted. We're extremely overstimulated and overwhelmed in our culture. Silence and solitude by itself is absolutely a solution to that. Just stop. I mean, that's all I'm telling you to do is just stop for a time every day, and you are immediately fighting back against the culture that is trying to overwhelm you constantly. That by itself should be, I think, reason enough in some regard. But what else does silence and solitude give us? One of the things that it can give us, that we definitely see Jesus use it as, is recovery. Have you ever been working and then it's been a long day, stressful day, something like that, and then you sit in the car and I don't know why, but it always happens to me in the summer. You sit in a very hot car. You know that feeling? And the heat just like consumes you and you're like, I don't know that I want to move at all right now. Like, it's blistering hot, but I just feel like I'm melting into the seat. Does anyone else know that feeling, or am I crazy? I'm probably crazy. It's okay. Listen, you just sit there and it's the first time you've had any quiet for 8 hours. I think we need more of that, because silence and solitude, they allow you to recover. They allow your soul and your mind to catch up with the rest of your body that's been working all day. Silence and solitude also allow for reflection. Man, when you are going and going and going and going and going, sometimes you don't get a chance to stop and say, hey, how did that go? Because you have to keep going. And so silence and solitude offer a time of reflection. How did things go? Did I handle this well? Could I have done things differently? God, guide me next time I'm in that situation. Silence and solitude offer a time of reflection. They also offer a time of humility. It's hard to tell, right? You don't want to read too much into these stories of Jesus, but it seems as though recovery is a part of why he takes time for silence and solitude. It seems as though you don't know that reflection was, but it also seems as though when the crowds get big, Jesus retreats. There's a saying that if you listen too closely, you'll start to believe your own press. There is a sense in which silence and solitude allow for humility rather than pride to grow in your heart. It's a lot easier to stay humble when you are anchoring yourself with God every day rather than when you are reading through reviews of your work or your activities every day. Silence and solitude can be a way of staying humble. Now, Jesus was God. Surely he didn't need help staying humble, but Jesus was human, and maybe some of that silence and solitude was used to help him stay humble rather than fall into these temptations that we saw outlined at the beginning of his ministry. Silence and solitude can also be used for centering, to recenter yourself. Remember what the important things are. Remember why we're here. Remember why all of this work is being done in the first place. There are a number of other reasons, but these were 4 that I thought were impactful. Silence and solitude. If the goal is to be like Jesus, then we need to do silence and solitude. And we also need to remember, this is not a fast thing. If you guys start this week and you start your quiet time in the mornings with coffee, all right, which is a great way to do it, and you get to Friday and you're like, I don't feel any more like Jesus, that's not surprising. What we're talking about when we talk about the spiritual discipline of silence and solitude is not a quick fix. It is not something that is going to just magic pill all of your stress and anxieties away. It is not something that will overnight just turn you into someone who moves at Jesus' pace. It is the seemingly insignificant practice of Jesus' life that led to the life that he lived. If we want that, it might take us years. Transformation is not a thing that we wake up and see after one day. It's often not a thing we wake up and see after 1 week. It's often not a thing we wake up and see after 1 month. But as you start going on through the years and you implement the practice of silence and solitude, you will look back on your life and have noticed a distinct shift in pace. This is what Jesus did, and it is beneficial to us. It may not feel like a massively big thing. This is what we talked about with the spiritual disciplines. They may not feel big. They may not feel groundbreaking. They may not feel important, right? They're not the spiritual things. They're the physical things that Jesus did. They're not the big spiritual things. They're the little things that Jesus did. They may feel insignificant, but if we want the life of Jesus, we have to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. And in his lifestyle, he constantly made time for silence and solitude. Lastly, how do we do this? What is this going to look like? Listen, if you haven't sat in silence in a while, it's unpleasant. I mean, you get things that pop into your head and distractions, and then you instinctively grab your phone and you go, I'm not supposed to be doing that, and you put it away. And it's more difficult than you would think. It is just as simple as it sounds. How do you do it? You pick a time every day, and you just sit down and have quiet. That's it. That seems to be what Jesus did. What can you do during it? Well, I think it's clear you can rest. I think it's clear that you can pray. I think that maybe reciting a memory verse is a good thing. But if we're going to live the lifestyle of Jesus, then we have to pick a time, anytime. There are really more right ways to do this than wrong ways to do this. Pick any time, any amount of time, and commit that time to silence and solitude with God. One last thing on this. There are, two last things. 3 last things. I'm almost done, I promise. There are a lot of ways to do silence and solitude, but one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this one is because it kind of sets itself up as a framework for so many of the other spiritual disciplines. You notice we're going to talk about prayer as a spiritual discipline. Well, that's something you can do in silence and solitude. We're going to talk about fasting as a spiritual discipline. We're going to talk about Bible study as a spiritual discipline. If you don't have silence and solitude, these other disciplines become much more difficult. This is basic and fundamental and foundational to living the lifestyle of Jesus because it allows space for these other disciplines to be done intimately. And so silence and solitude can be really, really important. The last thing, promise, applying the spiritual disciplines. And this is not just for silence and solitude, but this is going to apply for all of the ones that we talk about over the rest of the summer and any other ones that were left off the list. There are more right ways to do this than wrong ways. And when we apply it, you have 2 different levels that you can apply this on, or a spectrum of levels that you can apply this on. Jesus was in silence and solitude all night long before a big decision. Jesus did not stay in silence and solitude all night, every night. That seems to be a bigger demonstration of the discipline for a specific case. Sometimes we're going to practice the spiritual disciplines in big ways. There is a time to focus on silence and solitude this week. And what that means is you're going to take 1 hour, 2 hours, 1 full day this week, and turn off your phone and go off by yourself and sit in the quiet for a whole day. That's unrealistic to keep that up every single day, right? That's called being a monk or something, right? Like, that's not the point. The point is that there are different levels and ways that you can practice the spiritual disciplines. You can dedicate a weekend to going off and camping and only being in silence and solitude by yourself for a whole weekend. You can practice 5 minutes of it every day when you wake up. You can practice 30 minutes of it every day when you wake up. If you regularly do 30 minutes, maybe this week your focus is going to be bigger and you're going to say 2 hours in the morning. I'm going to really devote myself for this week to silence and solitude for 2 hours every morning. You can make this as big or as small as you would like. And it's doing things the way Jesus did. So, application of this. Do it every day. Find a way to do it every day. But also find other times and other places and other ways in your life to apply it in big, special ways. Right? We celebrate every day in some regard. But then we have certain days of the year that we celebrate way bigger. This is kind of the rhythm of the spiritual disciplines. Do them every day. But then sometimes focus on them and do them in a bigger way. Do them in a special way. This is how the spiritual disciplines are meant to be applied. In big ways, in little ways, in medium ways, in in-between ways. There are a lot more right ways to do this than wrong ways. So, if we are going to be applying the spiritual disciplines, living the life that Jesus promised us, we have got to start by finding and making time for silence and solitude in our lives. That's how Jesus lived. It's how he had an impact on the world. It's the rhythm of his life. It's the way he taught his disciples. It's how he centered himself. It's how he stayed humble. It's how he recovered and how he reflected. It is how he walked. This is how Jesus walked. He walked with regular silence and regular solitude. And if we want the blessing that he promised us, then we need to walk in the steps of Jesus as well. The first step to walking in Jesus' steps is to be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. And if you need to do that tonight, you can. If you need other prayers of the church, come forward now while we stand and sing.